This is South America, a football powerhouse, home to 10 World Cup championships. 5 from Brazil, 3 from Argentina, and 2 from Uruguay. On the football field, this continent dominates the world. But off the field, not a single South American nation is considered a global superpower. That contrast raises a question. How can a land with so much talent, passion, and natural wealth remain behind in global influence? South America is the 4th largest continent on Earth, covering about 17.8 million square kilometers, home to more than 430 million people, and packed with incredible resources. It holds the world's largest freshwater reserves in the Amazon basin, vast fertile lands, and immense deposits of oil, copper, lithium, and soy. Together, its economies produce roughly $4.2 trillion in GDP, just 1/7 the size of the US economy and a quarter the size of the EU economy. A continent that seems to have everything, yet struggles to turn potential into global power. So, what went wrong? The answer lies not just in politics or economics, but in the land itself. To understand why South America never became a superpower, we have to look beneath the surface, at the geography that shaped its destiny. Long before independence, South America's destiny was divided, quite literally, by a line on a map. In 1494, Spain and Portugal signed the Treaty of Tordesillas, splitting the continent between them. Spain controlled the vast western lands, while Portugal claimed the east, what would later become Brazil. But Spanish America was never one unified colony. It was split into several viceroyalties: New Granada in the north, Peru in the center, and Rio de la Plata in the south, each ruled separately from distant capitals, isolated by the Andes, the Amazon, and deserts in between. Communication was slow, trade was regional. Even the roads that connected towns rarely crossed mountains or jungles. Meanwhile, Portuguese Brazil looked outward. Its long Atlantic coastline gave it easier access to Europe and Africa, and encouraged a more centralized economy centered on the coast. When independence movements swept across the continent in the early 1800s, leaders like Simón Bolívar and José de San Martín dreamed of unity, a grand federation that could rival the great powers of their time. But those dreams quickly fractured. Bolívar's vision of Gran Colombia, a union of modern-day Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, and Panama, collapsed within a decade. Geography made unity nearly impossible. Mountains, rainforests, and deserts stood between new nations that barely knew one another. So while North America built one large country, linked by navigable rivers, plains, and early railroads, South America emerged as 12 separate nations, each facing its own struggles, each building its own roads, ports, and economies, and often competing rather than cooperating. Even before the modern age, geography had already drawn invisible walls across the continent. Few continents are as dramatic or as divided by nature as South America. Stretching like a spine down its western edge is the Andes Mountains, the longest continental mountain range on Earth, nearly 7,000 kilometers long, and in many places more than 6,000 meters high. The Andes act as a natural wall, separating the Pacific coast from the interior. For centuries, that wall made travel and trade between countries slow and costly. Even today, a road trip between Santiago and Buenos Aires means crossing mountain passes that close for weeks during winter snow. To the east lies another barrier, one of a very different kind: the Amazon basin. Covering 6.7 million square kilometers, it is the largest rainforest on the planet, dense, humid, and almost impossible to cross by land. The Amazon River itself is enormous, flowing more than 6,400 kilometers from the Andes to the Atlantic. But unlike the Mississippi or the Danube, it runs through sparsely populated forest, connecting few major cities. There are still only a handful of roads linking Brazil, Peru, and Colombia through the Amazon. Many areas are accessible only by boat or plane. And the Brazilian highlands, a vast plateau that shapes the country's settlement patterns. Its rivers flow eastward toward the Atlantic, making internal connections across the continent difficult. Together, these landscapes split South America into narrow, isolated regions. The Pacific countries, like Chile, Peru, and Ecuador, are confined between the ocean and the Andes. The Atlantic countries, Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay, face outward toward Europe and Africa. Few natural corridors exist to link east and west. That's why most major cities, Lima, Santiago, Buenos Aires, Rio de Janeiro, Sao Paulo, sit along the coast, while the continent's interior remains sparsely populated. This uneven geography made it hard to unify markets or build infrastructure. It limited inland trade and encouraged nations to export raw materials overseas instead of to each other. South America has never lacked natural wealth. Its challenge has always been turning that wealth into lasting power. For centuries, the continent's economy has relied on raw materials: copper from Chile and Peru, oil from Venezuela, soybeans from Brazil and Argentina, and now lithium from the so-called lithium triangle of Bolivia, Chile, and Argentina. This dependence on commodities creates what economists call a resource trap. When a nation's prosperity depends on exporting what it extracts rather than what it manufactures. When global prices rise, economies boom. When they fall, entire budgets collapse. It's a cycle that is repeated for decades. During the 20th century, several nations tried to industrialize. They launched policies known as import substitution industrialization, aiming to produce goods domestically instead of importing them. It worked for a while, but without integrated markets or reliable transport networks, growth remained uneven and fragile. Today, Brazil stands as the region's largest economy, with a GDP of about 2.3 trillion US dollars, making it the 9th largest in the world. Yet even Brazil faces structural limits: complex logistics, regional inequality, and heavy reliance on exports of soy, iron, and oil. Across the continent, infrastructure remains a challenge. The Andes, rainforests, and plateaus make cross-border roads and railways costly to build. Few major highways run from the Pacific to the Atlantic. For comparison, North America completed its transcontinental railroads in the 19th century, linking its east and west coasts and uniting its economy. In South America, even the Pan-American Highway, meant to connect the entire hemisphere, breaks at the Darien Gap, a 100-kilometer stretch of swamp and jungle between Panama and Colombia. Inside countries, growth is also uneven. Megacities like Sao Paulo, Buenos Aires, and Lima dominate national economies, while smaller cities and interior regions remain underdeveloped. The result is a continent of enormous potential, but limited connection. And even where wealth exists, unity doesn't. And that's another piece of the puzzle. Since independence, South America has seen more border conflicts and territorial disputes than any other continent in the modern era. In the 19th century, wars reshaped the map again and again. The War of the Pacific left Bolivia landlocked. The Paraguayan War devastated nearly half of Paraguay's population. And Gran Colombia, once Bolivar's dream of unity, broke apart into several smaller nations. These divisions weren't just political. They were reinforced by the mountains, jungles, and rivers that separated people from one another. While Europe rebuilt unity after centuries of conflict, South America moved in the opposite direction, each country turning inward, focusing on its own borders, its own capital, its own priorities. Attempts at continental cooperation came much later. Organizations like Mercosur, UNASUR, and CELAC were created to promote trade and integration, but progress has been slow. Today, trade within South America, between neighboring countries, makes up only about 15% of the region's total commerce. In contrast, Europe's internal trade accounts for roughly 60%. That means a Chilean product is often easier to sell in China or the United States than in neighboring Peru or Argentina. Over time, this external dependence grew stronger. South American economies rely heavily on exports to major powers, the United States, China, and the European Union. Foreign investment fuels growth, but it also means the continent's prosperity depends on decisions made abroad. Political instability has also been a recurring theme. Coups, populist waves, and cycles of corruption have made long-term regional projects difficult to sustain. But again, those issues don't exist in isolation. They are partly the result of the same geography that fragmented people, cities, and trade routes for centuries. Every nation has looked outward instead of inward, toward global markets, not regional unity. South America may not be a superpower today, but its story is far from over. The region still holds enormous potential, from its young population to its vast natural reserves that the world increasingly depends on. The Lithium Triangle, spanning Bolivia, Chile, and Argentina, contains more than half of the planet's known lithium reserves, a key resource for electric vehicles and renewable energy. Brazil, with its industrial base and clean energy leadership, is already among the world's top producers of hydropower and biofuels. And the Amazon basin, despite its challenges, remains one of humanity's greatest environmental assets, a reminder that South America's wealth isn't only in minerals, but in life itself. The continent's future depends on whether its nations can overcome the barriers that have long divided them, to connect, to cooperate, and to think beyond geography. Because in many ways, South America's greatest strength, its vast and diverse land, has also been its greatest obstacles. Geography gave it abundance, but also separation. The question now isn't whether South America could be powerful, but whether it can finally unite to turn its natural wealth into global strength. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed exploring South America's hidden geography, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. See you in the next video.